On the morning of April 12, 1981, inside cabin 28 at the Keddie Resort in Plumas County, California, 14-year-old Sheila Sharp walked into an unimaginable nightmare. She returned from an overnight stay at a neighbor's residence to discover the bound and battered bodies of her mother, Glenna Sue Sharp, her 15-year-old brother John, and his 17-year-old friend Dana Wingate. How could three individuals be brutally murdered in a secluded mountain community without a single neighbor raising an alarm, and why did the law enforcement investigation that followed fail the victims so completely? Glenna Sue Sharp, known to friends and family as Sue, was 36 years old and attempting to rebuild her life after separating from an abusive spouse. In the autumn of 1980, she gathered her 5 children and relocated to the rural Sierra Nevada foothills. Cabin 28 offered low rent and a fresh start, providing a modest refuge where Sue focused entirely on raising her family in the quiet woods, far removed from urban violence. The crime scene inside Cabin 28 was horrifyingly chaotic, characterized by extraordinary physical violence and strict restraint. Sheriff's deputies found Sue Sharp, John, and Dana bound with medical tape and electrical wire, having suffered severe blunt force trauma and multiple stab wounds. Modus operandi, defined in criminal justice as the functional method of procedure employed by an offender during a crime, indicated that multiple assailants operated with calculated control using weapons brought to the scene alongside household items. Amidst the horrifying scene in the living room, a chilling absence deepened the horror. Sue's 12-year-old daughter, Tina Sharp, was missing from the cabin, while her 2 younger sons and their young house guest sat unharmed in a nearby bedroom. The perplexing disappearance of Tina immediately transformed a local triple homicide into a frantic, high-stakes search for an abducted child across the dense forest terrain. The early response by the Plumas County Sheriff's Department established a pattern of critical mistakes that compromised the entire case. According to official police reports filed in April 1981, responding deputies failed to properly secure Cabin 28, permitting unauthorized individuals to traverse the crime scene. Crucial latent fingerprints were smudged, and vital biological evidence was cross-contaminated before state forensic experts arrived to conduct a rigorous analysis. Physical evidence recovered from the living room presented a complex narrative requiring meticulous preservation. Investigators collected 2 claw hammers, a bent kitchen knife, and various lengths of stained bindings scattered across the floor. However, without a strict chain of custody, defined as the continuous, documented chronological record verifying the custody and transfer of physical evidence, much of this material was improperly logged, undermining its eventual evidentiary value in court. Suspicion quickly shifted toward individuals residing within the immediate vicinity of Cabin 28. Neighboring resident Martin Smart, a former military veteran with a documented history of volatile behavior, and his temporary house guest, John Boubede, soon became prime subjects of interest. Official records indicate that both men maintained personal contact with Sue Sharp and displayed erratic behavior shortly after the discovery of the crime. An alibi, defined in legal terms as evidence showing an individual was present elsewhere when a crime occurred, was provided by both Smart and Boubede. They claimed to have spent the evening at a local establishment called the Backdoor Bar. Despite obvious discrepancies in their timeline and a handwritten note from Smart to his wife hinting at personal guilt, investigators failed to detain or aggressively question either man. The investigation suffered severe setbacks as prospective leads were systematically overlooked by leadership. A claw hammer matching one of the murder weapons was found in a nearby stream by a citizen and submitted to authorities, yet it sat unexamined in storage for decades. Interagency communication between local authorities and California Department of Justice officers deteriorated, stalling active field operations. As spring turned to summer in 1981, the physical evidence in the quiet resort town grew cold, leaving mountain residents in a state of sustained terror. The surviving Sharp children were forced to navigate profound personal grief without answers, while the fate of young Tina remained a tragic mystery echoing through the Sierra Nevada range, creating an open wound within the local community. 3 years after the initial horror inside Cabin 28, a dramatic development altered the trajectory of the case. In April 1984, a collector searching for discarded items in neighboring Butte County, nearly 30 miles away near Camp Lehman, uncovered a piece of a human skull. Forensic identification later confirmed the remains belonged to 12-year-old Tina Sharp, proving her abductor had moved her far beyond the initial perimeter. Determining an accurate timeline of death required specialized scientific evaluation of the recovery site. Forensic entomology, defined as the study of insect life cycle evidence on human remains to estimate the post-mortem interval, indicated the remains had lain in the forest for years. Tragically, an anonymous phone call placed to dispatchers in 1981 specifying Tina's location had never been properly processed by early detectives. For the surviving members of the Sharp family, the recovery of Tina's remains provided no comfort, only devastating confirmation of their worst fears. Sheila Sharp, who bore the massive psychological trauma of discovering the crime scene at 14, began a lifelong effort to demand law enforcement accountability. The lasting emotional damage inflicted on the survivors underscores the catastrophic human cost when an initial murder inquiry fails. The failure to connect the Butte County recovery to the primary Plumas County evidence highlighted severe jurisdictional divides during that era. Information sharing between rural law enforcement agencies was remarkably primitive in the early 1980s. This administrative gap permitted vital connections between physical evidence, geographic locations, and suspect movements to vanish into official archives without undergoing effective cross-county analysis or forensic evaluation. Decades later, independent investigators and journalists reviewing archived files uncovered startling statements previously ignored. A personal letter written by Martin Smart to his wife shortly after the murders contained a sentence that appeared to acknowledge his involvement in the crimes. Court records revealed that early detectives possessed this letter in 1981 but chose not to submit it for handwriting analysis or conduct a formal follow-up interrogation. Questions regarding systemic negligence or potential official cover-ups began to circulate widely within the public sphere. Rumors persisted that Martin Smart shared personal ties with senior personnel inside the Plumas County Sheriff's Department, leading many to suspect that key leads were deliberately suppressed. While explicit proof of corruption remains unconfirmed, the gross disregard of basic investigative procedures cultivated permanent skepticism among residents. Decades passed before fresh leadership within local law enforcement attempted to rectify the structural failures of the past. In 2013, Special Investigator Mike Gamberg officially reopened the cold case file, re-examining evidence lockers and auditing biological samples. Advancements in modern DNA technology offered renewed possibilities, providing hope that minute cellular material preserved on original bindings could establish a definitive genetic profile. During renewed field operations in 2016, search teams recovered a commercial knife and a second claw hammer from a pond situated near the former resort. This physical location matched details Martin Smart had allegedly disclosed to a mental health therapist who had originally notified law enforcement in 1981. The reality that vital therapeutic confessions were buried for 35 years revealed the true depth of early investigative negligence. The physical environment of Cabin 28 underwent dramatic alteration over the decades, while the homicides remained unsolved. The cabin stood abandoned for over 20 years, serving as an unsettling symbol of unresolved violence before county authorities ordered its complete demolition in 2004. Though the physical structure was destroyed, the memory of the crime remained permanently etched into the cultural identity of Keddie. Courtroom accountability became mathematically impossible as primary suspects died before formal indictments could be filed. Martin Smart passed away due to illness in 1986, and John Boubaid died in 1988, taking their first-hand knowledge to the grave. The deaths of these central figures robbed the surviving Sharp family of their legal right to see the suspects face cross-examination in a court of law. The Keddie Cabin murders stand as an enduring case study in how early procedural failures can permanently derail a capital investigation. Mismanaged crime scene security, unexamined physical evidence, disregarded witness reports, and jurisdictional siloing created an overwhelming series of obstacles. The case remains a solemn reference point utilized by modern homicide investigators to emphasize the vital necessity of flawless scene control. Beyond technical procedures and evidence logs, the central legacy of Cabin 28 lives in the ongoing grief of the surviving family. Decades after that horrific morning, Sheila Sharp continues to serve as an advocate for her deceased relatives, ensuring Sue, John, Dana, and Tina are remembered as human beings rather than mere cold case statistics. Her ongoing search for truth remains the primary force keeping the case alive. The intersection of a botched early investigation and the lasting trauma on the surviving family members illustrates a painful reality of unsolved crime. When official systems fail to conduct a rigorous inquiry during the critical first hours, the emotional burden of seeking justice falls entirely upon grieving relatives. Unresolved homicides create a perpetual cycle of trauma where closure is continually denied by historical negligence. Today, advanced forensic technology and genetic genealogy represent the final remaining tools capable of identifying the perpetrators. Contemporary investigators continue to analyze microscopic DNA fragments recovered from physical items logged in 1981, attempting to match genetic signatures against modern genealogical databases. Whether modern science can overcome 40 years of environmental degradation remains an ongoing question for forensic experts. Was the complete failure to resolve the Keddie Cabin murders the result of extraordinary incompetence by an underfunded rural department, or did intentional concealment protect the guilty? Key missing details continue to spark intense debate among cold case detectives, legal scholars, and forensic analysts. Until definitive biological evidence confirms the identities of all assailants, the true sequence of events inside Cabin 28 remains incomplete. The tragedy inside Cabin 28 stands as a grave reminder that improper early police work inflicts injuries that extend across generations. The memory of Sue Sharp, her children John and Tina, and young Dana Wingate requires continuous dedication to truth and objective re-examination. As investigators persist in reviewing the old case files, the hope remains that final clarity will eventually emerge from the mountain shadows.